As Richard said, my name's Paul Addy. Um, I'm going to talk through kind of the next 35 minutes around people culture, but also focusing on people engagement or employee engagement. Um, just get used to the slides, I think. So just to introduce myself in a bit more detail, I'm Paul Addy. I'm a qualified director of HR. I've been in HR over 19 years. And I'm a HR generalist, so cover all aspects of HR. I've worked for large corporate organisations such as Barclays, the Co-op, financial services side, General Electric on the money side, Pace Technology, and Asda. Most recently, I've been the Director of HR for the LAL Group. It's a medium-sized financial services organisation. I've worked there for the last 6 years before setting up Positive People HR. That organisation, when I joined, had 250 employees. It now has 1,400 employees, so that time's grown massively, and this is where engagement has been a really important aspect of building that business, and particularly the culture around its people. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. I'm also a qualified workplace mediator, and I have a real passion for employee engagement and doing the right thing. I think, as most of us will be, really passionate about our people. We all know that our people are really important to businesses, and if we can get them fully engaged with us, the benefits are enormous. And obviously I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. I'm also qualified as a Savile Holsworth Level AB practitioner around recruitment as well. So that's just a little bit about me. Let's go and talk about the main thing we're here to talk about. So in terms of what I'm going to cover and the learning outcomes, understand what company culture is and be better positioned to define it. I think organisations do struggle sometimes to understand culture, but also, well, what is our culture particularly? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. To be able to articulate what the drivers of an engaged team are, and as I said, I'm going to really focus on that and what that's meant to me in the organisations that I've worked for and the organisations. And to gain a greater understanding of some of the tools that are available to measure employee engagement and the people culture. Again, I think it's really important that you can demonstrate what the culture is and what the employees feel around that culture. And it's easy to put things into place, initiatives into place that you believe are developing the culture, but it's actually that what the people on the ground think. So those are the learning outcomes for this afternoon. So let's talk about organisational culture. Some of this may not be new to you, but I'm just going to cover that just as a context to the start of my session. So what is it? So it's a pattern of shared values and beliefs that produce certain norms of behaviour. And it is about the values of the organisation. It's about the behaviour, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about what drives that behaviour. What are some of the sources of culture, organisational culture? So in terms of what it includes, it's the expectations, the experiences, the philosophy, and the values kind of that hold it together. And it can be expressed as a self-image, the inner workings. So again, how the organisation works, what type of structure have you got. Interactions externally is quite important in terms of how you are perceived as an organisation, and how you interact with the external market, dependent on the business that you are in, and future expectations. And the self-image one is quite important as well, again, in terms of how you're perceived and how you want to be perceived as well. There's lots of brands out there that have that a specific image which they believe is driving their culture or is important to their culture externally and internally. It's based on shared attitudes, beliefs, customs, written and unwritten rules that have been developed over time. I think the thing with the unwritten rules is sometimes that can override some of the written rules and some of the other things. Things that happen internally that are not intended or it's not intended to happen can take over the culture, and that's one of the reasons. Good reasons to measure the organisation culture as you go along. So those are just the things, and we'll talk a little bit more detailed about that. So what's the purpose of organisational culture? Well, for me, it's about providing a sense of identity for the organisation, and particularly when you talk about employee engagement, something for the employees to hook onto in terms of also having a sense of belonging and a sense of identity with the organisation. Generate commitment and engagement. As I said, if you have a positive organisational culture and you can define it and you know what it is, and you can express that to your employees, then that's going to generate commitment and engagement. And I think in some industries it needs to be more carefully thought about than in others. Some industries are easy and some brands are easy because they already have that. But if you're developing a brand, an external brand or a culture, you really need to think about what's my hook here, what are we, as an organisation, are we trying to do. Helps make sense of things that happen within the company. I think if you've got a good organisational culture, people internally will understand more if a particular way, an action is done in a particular way, or something is carried out in a particular way, then people understand why it's being done in that way, because that's part of your culture. That's what we do. And obviously you can have negative cultures as well as positive cultures, particularly if you, and we'll talk about it a little bit more detail, but particularly if you've got someone who is dictatorial in your organisation, and they behave in that way, then, and that's not the culture you're trying to do, then people won't understand why that's happening. So it's quite important in terms of people understanding what's happening and why things are done in a certain way. Provides controls through policies and procedures and kind of written documentation. We all want to have a culture where people have the freedom to do, but there are times, and obviously we need to make sure that there are some rules around how we're going to treat people and how we expect people to behave within our organisations. Defines boundaries, again making it clear around what we expect as an organisation. I think you can all imagine if you had an organisation that had no boundaries, no policies and procedures, you can imagine kind of what chaos that might present to you, particularly as HR professionals. That might be very difficult for us to manage. So let's talk about how culture is demonstrated. And again, I'm going to kind of flit over this because I think the engagement piece is probably the most important part of what I'd like to talk to you about. So it's the way the organisation conducts its business, treats its employees, its customers, and the wider community. And I think we'd all agree with that. And again, going back to if you think about some of the really positive brands that are out there and what they're trying to achieve, is around the customers. They want to provide a good customer service, which is part of their culture, and that should be replicated internally in terms of providing employees with and treating them fairly, etc., etc. And particularly community and how you get, as an organisation, get involved with the community will, to external organisations and people, will kind of demonstrate what your culture is as an organisation. So to the extent which freedom is allowed in decision making, developing new ideas and personal expression, and again just talking a little bit about what I mentioned earlier on, if you've got an organisation that doesn't allow you to have autonomy in decision making, particularly at a more senior level, that can drive a lot of frustration, particularly for your talented organisation, employees in the organisation. If they don't have the autonomy to use that talent, then it is going to suppress creativity in the organisation as well. And I think it's really important that organisations do have an autonomy, and particularly senior people have autonomy. Otherwise, it will drive suppression of their talent. So I think that's really, really important. And we're talking about kind of engagement, and again, that's another important piece. People will be more engaged, and we'll talk about it a bit later on, if they have the opportunity to input. So how power and information does it flow through its hierarchy? Again, the power element of it. If you've got an organisation that is very hierarchical and decisions can't be made at certain levels, they can only be made at the top, or the people at the top of the organisation want to just get involved in everything and don't allow them team members or employees to make a decision, then that can make it very, very difficult for them. Oh, we've lost the slides. Am I still on the... Oh dear, I'm still on the voice. I've lost the slides, so just bear with us while we get that back. Oh, we've lost the slides, so just bear with us. So, we all are probably aware of organisations where, the senior execs of the organisation I want to take hold of the power, and I think again that can show you what kind of the culture is. How committed employees are collective objectives. Obviously, having collective objectives is really important in the first place. But how committed your people are to that will demonstrate kind of what kind of culture you've got. If your employees are not interested in the business and what you do, and obviously it's the organisation's role to make sure they are, and we'll talk about that a bit later on, then that will demonstrate what kind of culture you've got, particularly around people. So, if we have got a positive culture, it affects the organisation's productivity, its performance. It will make people feel more engaged and will be more engaged with the organisation, and therefore people are more motivated. They will give more commitment and be fully engaged. And going back to what I said earlier about having a sense of belonging, I think people really do want to have a sense of belonging to their organisation. And some of the organisations I've worked for, it's been easier to do than others due to their kind of external market and what they do and how people perceive them, whereas others, it's more difficult because the industry they're in maybe not as exciting, or what they do has an impact on the public in a negative way potentially. So that sense of belonging is really, really important. The one thing I'd say is, and I think we all know this, is culture is unique for every organisation. It's one of the hardest things to change, and I always use analogy of if you have an enormous cruise ship and you're trying to turn the ship, it takes a real long time to move it round, and that's the same culture in my view. You've got to really think about what do you want your culture to be, and therefore how do we move it, and it does move very, very slowly. You can't move people's thoughts very, very quickly. So that's kind of that piece. So what are the sources of culture? I think one of the key things for me is around visible symbols. I know in the organisations I've worked for, particularly in the last organisation, things being visible is really important. And again, if you're trying to embed a culture, things that are visible around the organisation, whether that's posters or whether that's the way you do things, and we'll talk about some of the practical things a bit later on, but the office environment can define a culture as well. I'm back on now. So, so yes, the office environment is really important in terms of how people feel and what they think the culture is. Yeah. Slogans and straplines, again, it goes back to kind of visioning. What is the vision of the whole organisation? Can people really buy into that strapline and into that slogan? Language within the organisation, I think if we use two kind of opposites, if you think about a financial services organisation, a bank, for example, excuse me, you would expect, the language obviously to be very professional. In an environment that is more less professional, the language may again be acceptable, that the language is different. People's behaviours. One of the things that I think is really important when looking at engagement, but also when you're building the culture of an organisation, what are the behaviours that are expected of everybody? And again, it's easy for organisations to say, oh yeah, we'll have a great set of behaviours, but if they're not embedded into the organisation, then there's no use, and particularly if the exec team or the senior team don't follow that, then again, it's no point having them. Um, what's interesting is kind of the histories and stories. There's a lot about things that have happened in the past can define the culture, and particularly if you've tried to change it into a positive, those histories and stories may stick around. Um, may stick around and be difficult to remove. So there are those things that you need to think about, particularly if you've gone from a family-run business to an organisation that's not run by family. Then sometimes those histories can get in the way. Dress codes as well can define, and I know it's always a big topic for debate in organisations I've worked for as to whether you should allow everybody to dress how they want, or do you want a professional image, etc., etc. And I've had numerous debates on dress code in my career. But the underlying things around the core values of the organisation, the beliefs of the organisation, and the common assumptions of each employer. And I think, again, going back to engagement, that's what we're talking about. What do people believe is happening in the organisation? Is the culture that you believe you have, is that kind of what's happening? Let's move along. There we go. So how do you define a strong organisational culture? So do all employees in the organisation have a common understanding of the purpose, strategy and goals? And many of you will probably have heard of the elevator speech. And that for me is kind of, if an employee is in an elevator with someone and they're asked what do they do or their organisation does, are they able to articulate that in a very brief 1 minute speech, even less than that? Do they know what the purpose and the strategy and the goals of the organisation are? So I think it's really important. Do they know? Don't know that. Oh, okay. So what are the core values? We talked about that. What are the core values of the organisation? And does everyone have a common understanding, again, of those values? The important thing here is, does everybody know? And there's always a strong educational piece in organisations, and how do you embed it? And that's about, giving those messages constantly, having them visible around the office or around the environment, and that will really help in terms of embedding that. But what are the core values, and does everybody know what they are? Is there a team spirit in the organisation? Does everybody work to the same, and it goes back to the common goal, does everybody know what that common goal is? Are they all working towards it, or are they working for themselves? Is everyone highly involved and committed? Involvement is a massive piece, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about engagement. But that's really is important. That people do feel involved, and you get everybody at every level in some shape or form involved in the organisation. Sorry, just move across. So how does the company define success? So do you know what success looks like for your organisation? Can you put your finger on it? Have you defined it? Do you know? And that's about, I suppose, having a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan that shows what success looks like. And have you shared that? How open are you with your communication? And I think that's a really important thing for me, and I'll again talk about that a little bit later on around being open with your communication and sharing information as much as possible. How do you handle agreement and disagreement? This is an interesting one. So how, do people feel that, if there is a disagreement, that their opinions are listened to and there's a respectful response given back? Is it all open? Do people listen to each other? Do people understand if someone's not happy with a decision, or if they've put an idea forward and it's not accepted? Do they know why? Again, do you communicate that outcome? Communication, as you will see later on, is an important aspect to me. And what behaviours are regarded as deviant in the company? So again, what do you know what the positive behaviours are and what the deviant behaviours are? And how adaptive and innovative is the company? And I know this is quite a challenging one as well, because particularly if you work for a smaller organisation that's growing, you'll find that in its smaller days that it's obviously being innovative. It's trying to improve the business itself, grow its business, and sometimes that can be stifled as the business grows. And how do you keep that innovation um, as an organisation grows. And again, I think I'll talk about that a bit later on, about how to do that. So that's how kind of some of the things to think about defining a strong organisational culture. So I've got a bit of a poll that we're going to send out now. So if you can just answer from it, that'd be great. And we can see kind of, oh, yeah. So because there's kind of mixed responding at the moment going on. Is that the end? So around 35%, 35% kind of don't have a vision for what it wants culture to be. And I suppose if you could answer on the chat, is that something that you want as an individual? I think you should have. Is that is it being driven by anyone in your organisation? Is it something that you actually want? Of those that have responded no, you could just kind of just put in the chat if there's any comments around that as to do you want it? Do you think you should have it? I'm just going to end the poll there. A few people writing up, so I'll come back to that. Yeah, so there's a few yeses coming through. And I think it is really important. I think for me, how you connect things as an organisation is really important. And again, you'll see shortly, talk about connecting. And people need to connect to something. And it goes back to that sense of belonging, sense of understanding. So I think it is really important that you do as an organisation have a defined culture. Okay, so Carol, there, what you've got is kind of should change. It's old-fashioned, and you've got to make small steps in doing that. But that's interesting. Thank you for that. And we've got a couple of other polls as we go along as well. I'm just going to have a drink of water. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to talk about employee engagement now, and I think this is the main bit where I'm going to hopefully give you some practical solutions around this. I think we've all seen definitions of employee engagement, but I think the key one is to what extent employees have a sense of belonging, as I've talked about, or are prepared to give discretionary effort to the company. In terms of what I determine kind of the engagement elements, as I call them. So the first one is connecting. I mentioned connecting earlier on. I think it's really important that your organisation values, beliefs connect, and that that everybody can see how they work together. So if you've got an overall vision for your organisation, great. But does everything else? Does your people culture link into that vision as well? So connecting is the employee engaged with the purpose, the vision, the mission of business. Do you have values or behaviours that your employees can relate to? What is the relationship like between with the employee's manager? And I think that's a real focus. We probably all know that more people leave organisations because of their manager than any other. You may not always get that as the response. However, there have been polls in the past that suggest 1 in 3 people leave organisations because of their manager. So if you can get that relationship right, then that's helpful. Communicating, I've mentioned this before. Do your employees know what's going on in the organisation? Do they feel up to date on performance of the business? And again, a lot of organisations I've worked for can shy away from presenting that kind of information. They feel that they don't need to know it. The most recent organisation we worked for, communicating was massive, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of what was going on in the organisation. Again, in employee surveys, you tend to find that communications are one of those questions or one of those areas where some people say, oh, we over-communicate in this organisation, I haven't got time to read it all, or, oh no, we don't get told anything, and it's difficult to find a balance. But I certainly think that communication is a key element to people feeling engaged, knowing what's going on in the organisation. Developing, do your employees feel they have the skills to do the job they're employed to do? Do they have the support to further develop? Again, people need to feel that there is some progression in the organisation. They need to feel there's somewhere to go, because if there isn't, they may look elsewhere. And again, that's going to add to your attrition figures. Just continuing on the elements involving, I've mentioned that as well. Do you involve, do you ask for opinions and ideas from employees? Do you involve them in developing change? How much do you involve people in change? Now, again, I'm quite keen in the organisations that I work for, and when I'm advising organisations around this, is get them involved as quickly as possible, as much as you can. One organisation that I've worked for, we were doing a really big change around reward, and right from the beginning, we've involved team members, employees in that to get their input, and that hopefully then when we come to presenting the change will make it easier for us to implement. And I think we all know that, but how often do we actually do that? Rewarding, do your employees feel valued? Do you have financial and non-financial incentives? I think again a lot of organisations think around reward, it's got to be financial. It doesn't. There are lots of things you can do non-financial. And again, going back to connecting and how well do you know your people, how well does the line manager know their people, their team members. There are people that need kind of confirmation that they're doing a good job quite regularly, and that could be just, you're doing a great job if it's a weekly one-to-one. Just making sure that, as long as they are doing a good job, that you kind of comment on that, well done, and also making it public as well is helpful. And again, we'll talk about that later on. So engagement might vary in organisations. Again, organisations are different, but these elements will help and embed effectively support a people-centric culture or people-centric organisation. The key to successful embedding it is to create a model that is visible to employees and that regular communication is in place. So one of the things I've done in other organisations is to create an engagement model around this. It's quite visual, and that model is still used, and we pin everything onto that, or the organisation pins everything onto that model, so that if we're communicating about a reward, it links into that model, and we use it as a communication platform, and that's worked really well for that organisation. And I must say that organisation now is an Invested in People champion. So it achieved gold in 2012 when I was working for them, and became a champion. And that's because we put these things in place. So again, if that's, and we'll talk about this a bit later on, but if that's something that you want to use to measure your people culture, then these are things that are really important as part of that. Okay, so let's just move on to kind of go into in a bit more detail. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of talk through in a bit more detail about what I mean in some of these things. So in terms of connecting, create the vision and the purpose for the organisation, develop values and or behaviours, and again, you need to make clear kind of which they are. They can kind of look the same, but we need to be clear whether they're values or their behaviours. Develop recruitment strategies that ensure cultural matches. Again, to do that, you need to understand what your culture is. If you don't, how can you recruit into it? And some people may say, well, actually, we don't want everybody to be the same, but behaviourally, you still want people to match your organisation's culture. Develop leadership capability. It's really important that your leadership teams know kind of what the culture is, and that you're developing the capability to support and manage team members in the right way. Create a proactive one-to-one process. Create dignity at work policy. That's really important in terms of people feeling connected and feeling they're going to be treated fairly. And create a employment engagement program. And this is something that I did in the most recent organisation, and I did it because I personally used to get, not frustrated, but if you are leaving another organisation and you've got a 3-month notice period or even a 1-month notice period, how many times do you kind of get the offer letter and send the contract back, and then you hear nothing, and you just turn up on the day? And I feel that's your engagement starts right from kind of the recruitment attraction process, and it's got to continue throughout. So doing simple things like on sending out the contract, follow up with an email saying welcome, it's just a short email, welcome them to the organisation, really looking forward to them starting. One of the other things you could do is, one of the things that we did in my last organisation is we created a welcome card, and a week before they started, we send them the welcome card signed by all the team, saying, welcome to the organisation, and then a week before or a few days before they do start, the line manager calls them to say, have you got everything? Have you got any concerns? And I think it's really important. You know, people and the feedback we've had from that is fantastic, and I think it's really important. So just some tips there for you. So to communicate, um, yeah, yeah. Yeah, can you give us some practical solutions? I think I've just talked about some of those things there about sending kind of emails out immediately, getting the line manager to call them and keeping in contact, or you know, just, if you can set something up around automated emails that could send something out. But there's lots of things you could do. Again, it depends on what resource you've got. If you've got limited resources, trying to find the easiest thing that works for you as an organisation. Um, so the next one's kind of communicating. I said earlier on, this is really important. You know, carrying out face-to-face briefings to update employees, such as roadshows, team briefs. Developing regular communication channels, such as email articles. You know, it depends what you've got and how much money you've got, resources you've got. Plasma screens are a great way to get messages out. Does anybody use plasma screens at the moment to get messages? But in my experience, I think that's a really great thing to do. But obviously, it's quite expensive. And obviously, intranets are usually a good thing to do. Move on. Developing, there's lots of things you can do around developing. Obviously, make sure you've got a good induction program. And again, I've worked for organisations where it's not been particularly good, and I've worked for organisations where it's been really good. This is your opportunity to share the initial kind of vision, values, and get that really embedded within the organizer, within the people that are starting. Gives you an opportunity to cover lots and lots of things around behaviours, around benefits. I really truly believe that a good generic induction program is important to get your people engaged at that point. Even more, you want to get them excited eventually. You know, that's what you want. Develop a program to ensure employees have the skills to do the job. So make sure whatever you develop, make sure that they can do the job, particularly if it's a specific industry. You know, and it depends kind of what organisation you are and whether you have volume roles. You might have a particular induction to move them into that volume. If it's one-off, it might be a different way, but have some kind of induction program. Create a performance management process that focuses on development. So one of the things that you can do around that is if you set objectives for your employees, making sure that as part of those objectives you include at least 2 development objectives. So for example, if one of your team members or employees has an objective to deliver a new project or deliver a project, but they haven't actually done it before, one of the development objectives that sits within that is to go on a project management course or read a book or whatever it might be. So it's about linking the objectives and some development objectives to that. Current assessments of your company's capability. I'm not sure how many organisations look at that in totality and kind of understand, well, what is the capability of our organisation? Developing talent management processes and developing recruitment strategy that allows people internally to apply for internal roles. I think we all do that. Certainly organisations I've worked for, but I think you've got to make sure that people internally are going through that process, particularly if they are rejected and it's given to an external person, that there's some kind of process that moves them into. So for example, the line manager, when they give the feedback, should be linking in with the training and development department to kind of link, well, okay, what do we need? What are their aspirations? And if you've got something in place like that, that'll make people feel really, again, valued. Involving, I've mentioned this, you create employee forums, use focus groups when implementing change. I've kind of mentioned that, making sure you use them within that process. Implement idea schemes, give employees the opportunity to meet with senior managers. And again, organisations that I've worked for, we've kind of included linking employee of the month award, for example, and what you get as part of the prize for that, or part of the reward, is you get half an hour with one of the exec team. Any exec team member you want, and they can have a half an hour chat with them. So give employees the opportunity to meet with senior managers. It might be in something like a breakfast club or something like that, but give them the opportunity. And then let's talk about reward briefly. So, make sure your remuneration strategy is clear and fair. I mean, does everybody know how it works? Do you have a job evaluation process in place? And therefore people know what that is and they can see how it's works. And is your structure visible? Can everybody see where the roles are? And that will obviously help for career development as well if people can see the career path that they need to go on. Create opportunities for visible, simple thanks. So, again, we talked about that a bit earlier on. Create an Employee of the Month program. Create a loyalty program. Usually they're called long service awards. I tend to refer to them as kind of a loyalty program. Develop individual award programs, team award strategies, and celebrate success. I think celebrating the success in the business is really, really important, and make sure that you celebrate individual success in the organisation. Again, just a practical solution therefore that you could do, and one of the things that we've used in the past is something called a Wonder Wall. And that is basically people can, it can be a personal story, a personal achievement, it can be something in work, but it's an opportunity to get out there what they've done and celebrate that success. So, my final statement on this slide is if you think you've all these initiatives in place, consider this. How do you communicate or bring these together that's visible to everyone? Do you? Have you got something that brings all this together? And this is where the engagement models that I've created in the past come in. They bring everything together. We're nearing the end, I think. We've got just a little bit of a poll here. If you wouldn't mind just kind of responding to this would be great. So this one's around, do you think your organisation has a truly people-centric culture? We're bobbing up and down here, but we're kind of airing on the nose here. Quite interesting. Okay. And we've just got a question there about can the slides be emailed yet? We will email the slides out. So we've got 64% say no, they don't. And again, you've got to think about what does the organisation want. And I think as HR professionals, our role is to influence, the senior people in the organisation, the benefit of having a people-centric culture and what you can do. I'm conscious of time because I've been on kind of 40 minutes already. But subjects, and as you can see, I'm quite passionate about engagement and how we do that. So let's talk about measuring engagement then. So there are a number of ways in which you can measure it. Analyze the performance of your business. So your business, the performance will tell you whether or will give you an indication of whether you have good engagement. Because if your business is year on year delivering, it probably is because your people are engaged. It might not be the only reason, but it could be one of the reasons. Analyse customer feedback, understand complaints, take part in independent customer surveys. There is such a thing as Investors in Customer, which gives you a Net Promoter Score and shows you how positive your employees are with customers. And again, as we know, if your people are giving really good customer service, they're probably very engaged with your organisation, with your brand, with your products, services, etc., etc. Analyse your HR KPIs. Such as attrition or employee turnover or retention, however you want to term that, absence level. Now I know on the information that was given prior to this session, there were a number of people that had registered that having retention or attrition problems. And if you could kind of just comment on kind of what your attrition rates are, that'd be really helpful, because one of the things again, in the last organisation that I worked for, a predominantly call centre environment, when in 2011, the attrition within the call centre environment was 75%. By 2013, it had gone down to 30% through the things that we were doing, these kind of engagement pieces. So that, again, if you're talking about benefits, which I'm going to talk about in a second, impact on bottom line has to be there. Implement exit interviews, and again, I think organisations do exit interviews, but one of the things that I've certainly found is, are you asking the right questions? One of the key things for me is if someone says they're leaving, or that you want to start asking when did this start when did you start thinking about it? And people mostly do that, but do you say what was happening at the time that you started thinking? And that's brought out a lot for me in terms of actually the real reason why people are moving on. And I think that's really important. Exit interviews and the questions are really important. Employee surveys, I think most organisations do those, but what do you do with them? It's easy to do them, but do your action plan and what the other things that you need to do with that. Development temperature checks initiatives such as quick, regular surveys or software-based initiatives. Again, there are products out there, but quick surveys can be done where you just send out monthly pulse questions, might be just 5 questions, just to sense what's going on in the organisation. Focus groups, employee meetings, and use independent frameworks to assess your people's strategies, such as investing. So I've mentioned this investing in people already. Again, I think there are obviously a lot of organisations that invest in people at different levels. There are different levels. You've got the standard bronze, silver, and gold. So if you are a gold organisation, you are, in terms of people management and how you treat your people, you're obviously very high up in that. Top 100 companies are other ones as well, MCIPD awards. So there's a number of ways in which you can kind of measure and using independent frameworks, and I would always suggest using independent frameworks to help you because I think they really do help with that. So I hope that's been helpful in terms of kind of some of the measures that you can use. I've just got one final poll, if you wouldn't mind responding to this one. I'd appreciate it. Okay, it's obviously a very positive response there. Okay, that's great. So 87% of you, and 0.5%, don't forget the half, would like to use frameworks. And, I think it is really important that you do. And I'm going to talk about now the benefits of doing it. And this is how I suppose we sell this to our senior teams. Increase overall business performance. Again, we know that if people are engaged and they stay, as an organisation you grow in skill and capability because if people are staying longer, they become more experienced. So your overall business performance will increase. Improve retention and absence rates, which impacts on overall bottom line. So if you're not having to re-recruit all the time, of the recruitment costs, sorry Richard, recruitment costs and absence rates, if people are there, and depending on what industry, and the absence rate can have a massive, massive impact on business performance. Increase customer experience, satisfaction. Again, I talk about this clear sense of purpose. Everyone has a clear sense of purpose, a sense of belonging to the organisation. Provides loyalty and develops pride in the organisation. And I think, as senior as HR professionals and senior teams should really want to, have that, want everybody in the organisation to have real pride about working for them. And it is more challenging in some industries than other. I recognise that, and that's why you've got to look differently each organisation. So those are some of the benefits. Just quickly, just picking up, I asked a question about retention and attrition. Obviously, there's some there. It's pretty good compared to the industry, which is great. But do you want to improve that? Do you want it to be even better? Do you think it could be even better? So I think that might be the end of my presentation. So does anybody have any specific questions they'd like to ask me or any comments? If you'd just like to just type in there, that'd be great. So as I've said, I'm very passionate about engagement and have used lots of different ways to get people and team members engaged in organisations. So if you want to contact me separately regarding some of the things that I've done, more practical ideas, or need any help, then obviously that's what I'm here for. You can see my contact information on the slide there. You can email me at paul.addy@positivepeoplehr.co.uk, and both my numbers there. And the website's there as well if you want to have a look at that, positivepeoplehr.co.uk. That'd be great. And you can send inquiries through that through the website as well. There's a couple of people typing, so I'll just wait a couple of seconds, see if anything comes up. Yeah, and obviously the email's on there, so you can email me if you have any specific questions. I want to do offline, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. I haven't got my LinkedIn profile on there, but I am on LinkedIn. Um, so it looks like still a couple of people writing. Oh, one question there. We do have initiatives in place to change culture and employment, but the issue at my company is that the leadership team don't model these values. Yeah, it is very, very difficult, and you've got to try and get kind of influence into it. And I think the only way you can do that is by demonstrating, the impact, and through HR KPIs, through business performance. I think it is very difficult. You see it in lots of organisations where the middle layer of managers are really keen on it and really want to do it, but then again, because it's not displayed by senior team, I think it is about finding yeah, I think it's generally about finding ways to demonstrate it, and test it, and kind of say, look, I want to do these things. Let me demonstrate to you. Let's put them in place and demonstrate them. Again, I think it depends on whether it's a behavioural thing as well. And if it's the senior team that are not buying into that, do any of them, and if you do, you need to find the ones that do, and use them to try and influence the ones that don't by giving them feedback. Now that's difficult because again, in some organisations, if you don't have a culture where feedback is acceptable, or you haven't provided development in giving feedback, then people might find that difficult. But at senior level, people should be relatively comfortable doing that. I won't say they're all comfortable, but they should be relative. So it's about finding, you need to find an alliance with somebody who is really good at it, really bought into it, and use them to influence the others. I think that's the best way to do that, or by trying to demonstrate it through changing HR KPIs or using other people as well. I think that's the best thing. Okay, so I think I haven't got any other questions, so thank you for that, Jenny. But as I said, you can email me following this presentation. I hope you've all enjoyed that, and there's been some practical solutions in there. But if you have got anything and you need my support, then please do contact me. Okay, and I'll hand you over to Richard.
Thanks, Paul. In fact, it was a fantastic sort of webinar. I don't know if you all agree, particularly as it's Paul's first one as well. So much information and obviously great sort of feedback from the polls. It's quite interesting that a lot of you are actually doing these things. And I think where Paul comes from on this side is if you need any advice on even trying to get the culture moving within the business, make some changes, obviously do reach out to him. That's his speciality. I've actually had the fortunate situation where I've actually seen the culture that Paul has built within an organisation, and I can certainly vouch for that. So on to the final part. I think the next webinar we have is in 2 weeks' time, and that's Managing Stress from Barbara Nixon, and the catalogue then starts to run again and pick up again as sort of the 12th of May, a couple of weeks layoff. And as you can see, there's 2 there. If you want to book onto them, please do go to the website and obviously reserve your space from there. The only final thing for me to do now, really, is thank you very much for your time. Thank obviously Paul for his, and hopefully we will see you on future webinars. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you.
The leader has turned lecture off, and your line has been unmuted.